Hello and welcome to this short Skill Corner video looking at our game intelligence after possession data on ball engagements. Why have we created this data set? Well, tackles, interceptions and blocks offer a signal, but they do lack context. You don't necessarily have to win the ball to defend well. Often players will be forcing their opposition backwards or setting a trap. And teams defend together, so we will often see pressing triggers and pressing chains. We're now able to understand them in more detail. So what do these metrics look like? Well, we've created a pressure engagement type, which is when a single player applies pressure to a ball carrier. We have a pressing or a pressing chain engagement type, which are when multiple players from the same team apply pressure to a ball carrier. We have a counter press engagement, which is when players lose the ball and then within a certain time frame go and apply pressure to the ball carrier. And we also have a recovery press, which is when players run towards their own goal to press the ball carrier. Alongside those four, we also have a fifth bucket, which we're calling other, which contains other metrics, including jockeys. So what does this look like and how does it differ to traditional metrics? Well, this is one player's actions in one game. We can see green and red dots here, which represent successful and unsuccessful defensive actions. However, we do lack context as to actually what's happened here. When we overlay the Skill Corner game intelligence data, we can now start to see not only do we get more information, but we can actually understand what's happened in each of these actions too. This particular example is a recovery press. The phase of play was a defensive transition. The player covered 43 meters and they managed to reach a sprint speed, and they did stop the possession danger in this particular on-ball engagement. So you can really start to see the granularity we can get from every single on-ball engagement. We're now going to look at a striker comparison. What's important here is we're not comparing these players in terms of quality, it's just a different way in which they've engaged the ball carrier at their respective clubs. When looking at the total on-ball engagements for every 30 minutes of opposition time possession, these three players ranked really quite similar. It would be difficult to tell them apart. However, when we actually look at the split of their engagement types, we can start to see there are clear trends. Certain players are making more recovery presses, other players are making more counter pressures, for example. So we're really starting to get an understanding of actually how these players are engaging the ball carriers. Which players are more likely to run back towards their own goal? Which players are more likely to react quickly to a counter press? Not only can we just look at the entire buckets of pressing types, but we can actually look at one specific engagement and understand how do they do that in more detail. So here we're going to take a pressing engagement, which is when the player goes as part of a team. We can now understand how many times for every 30 minutes of opposition in possession do they make these actions in a high block compared to a mid block. And straight away here, we can get a little bit of insight by looking at the player on the right here, Elias Melkerson. He is the only one of these three players who makes more pressing actions in a high block compared to a mid block. Not only that, but we can actually start to understand the effectiveness of these pressing actions. What percentage of the time were they able to force the opposition backwards? What percentage of the time were they able to affect or prevent a line-breaking pass? And also, what percentage of the time were the team able to make a regain when this particular player made that particular engagement type? So not all pressures are created equal. We started by talking about the challenges, and that's that traditional metrics offer us limited context in terms of being able to measure a player's defensive output. We've created those 5 core buckets of engagement type, and we also have flags for effectiveness and prevention of those actions. What that is now allowed us to do is better understand how a player engages a ball carrier. Not only that, but when we link it to phase of play, we get a deeper understanding of how players are defending. Thanks a lot for listening. If you want any more information, please feel free to reach out to your local Skill Corner representative. Thank you.